We've been told Roth conversions are always a smart, long-term move. But when you look closer, that idea does not fully hold up. Because sometimes the strategy designed to save taxes quietly creates new ones. And most people do not realize this until it is already too late. There is something called the Roth Conversion Trap. It does not feel like a mistake when you are doing it. In fact, it often feels responsible and even financially sophisticated. You are paying taxes now to avoid them later. That sounds logical, clean, and forward-thinking. But the trap begins with one quiet assumption: that your future tax rate will be higher than today. And for many retirees, that assumption is simply not true. Let us slow down here for just a moment, because this is where most people get emotionally pulled in. There are generally two types of people considering conversions. The first group is driven by fear. They hear that taxes will rise dramatically in the future. They imagine losing control over their retirement income, and they act quickly to protect themselves. The second group is driven by optimization. They run projections, compare brackets, and calculate long-term outcomes. They want to minimize lifetime taxes with precision. Both groups believe they are making a smart decision, but both can fall into the same hidden trap. Because Roth conversions do not happen in isolation. They interact with everything else in your financial life: your Social Security, your Medicare premiums, and your tax brackets. And this is where the numbers begin to shift in unexpected ways. A conversion increases your taxable income for that year, which can push you into a higher tax bracket temporarily. But the ripple effects often go much further than that. For example, it can increase how much of your Social Security is taxed. It can also trigger higher Medicare premiums through IRMAA, and those costs are not always small or short-lived. This is where many well-intentioned plans begin to drift off course, because the focus stays on tax rates alone, instead of total lifetime financial impact. Now, here is something that often surprises people. A large percentage of retirees actually drop into lower tax brackets. Their income becomes more controlled and often more modest. Their spending patterns shift as life slows down, and many deductions still apply in subtle ways. So the urgency to prepay taxes becomes less obvious, and sometimes completely unnecessary. But the Roth conversion trap is not just about taxes. It is also about timing, because when you convert matters just as much as how much you convert. And this is where a more careful strategy begins to emerge. Not aggressive, not fearful, but quietly intentional. And we will walk through exactly what that looks like. To understand the trap, we need to look at how conversions actually play out. Not in theory, but across real retirement timelines. Because the difference between a good decision and a costly one is often subtle. Let us walk through a simplified breakdown. Imagine three broad groups of retirees. Roughly 30% will remain in low tax brackets throughout retirement. Their income is modest, stable, and carefully managed. For them, aggressive Roth conversions often create unnecessary tax burdens. They end up prepaying taxes at higher rates than they would have paid later. Another 40% fall into a middle range. Their tax rates fluctuate depending on withdrawals and timing. This group requires careful planning and precise execution. Small adjustments can make a meaningful difference over time. The final 30% may benefit most from conversions. These are individuals with high savings and large required distributions later. Without planning, they risk being pushed into higher tax brackets in their 70s. But even here, the timing must be handled with care, because converting too much too quickly can still backfire. Now, here is where the psychology becomes important. Many people feel a sense of relief after completing a large conversion. It feels like they have taken control of their future. But that feeling can sometimes replace careful analysis. And this is where quiet mistakes begin to compound, because the tax system is not linear. It is layered, interconnected, and often unintuitive. A single decision can affect multiple areas at once. For example, increasing income by $10,000 may not just add tax. It can also phase out deductions or credits. It can change healthcare costs in ways that are not immediately visible. And these combined effects can quietly outweigh the intended benefit. This is why a purely tax rate comparison is often incomplete. It ignores the full system surrounding your income. Now let us pause here for a moment, because this is not about avoiding Roth conversions entirely. They can be extremely valuable in the right context. The goal is not to reject the strategy. It is to understand where it actually fits, and more importantly, where it does not. Because the real risk is not missing an opportunity. It is locking yourself into a suboptimal path, one that feels correct, but costs more over time. So how do you avoid this trap? The answer is not complexity. It is awareness, pacing, and careful sequencing. And that begins with understanding your timing window, because there is a specific period where conversions are most effective, and most people either miss it or misunderstand it. This window is quiet, but incredibly powerful. And once you see it clearly, the strategy becomes much simpler. Let us explore that window next. There is a window in retirement that many people overlook completely. It often appears after you stop working, but before other income begins. This period can last several years depending on your situation. And during this time, your taxable income may be unusually low. No salary, no required minimum distributions yet, and sometimes delayed Social Security benefits. This creates what many planners quietly call a tax valley, a period where your tax rate is temporarily reduced. And this is where Roth conversions can become truly effective. Not rushed, not oversized, but carefully layered over time. Instead of converting large amounts in a single year, you gradually fill up lower tax brackets year by year. This approach keeps your overall tax rate more stable and avoids triggering unnecessary side effects. Think of it less like a one-time decision and more like a quiet, ongoing adjustment process. Now here is something subtle but very important. This window does not last forever. Once required minimum distributions begin, your flexibility shrinks. Your income becomes more structured and less adjustable, and your ability to control your tax bracket becomes limited. So the goal is not to eliminate taxes entirely. It is to smooth them across time, to avoid sharp spikes that create unnecessary pressure. Now let us connect this to real behavior. Many retirees delay action because they feel uncertain. They worry about making the wrong move. So they wait, hoping for more clarity later. But waiting can quietly close the most valuable window. And then decisions become more reactive than intentional. On the other side, some people move too aggressively. They convert large amounts early, trying to get it done quickly. But this often pushes them into higher brackets unnecessarily and reduces the efficiency of the entire strategy. So the balance sits somewhere in the middle, steady, measured, and responsive to your actual numbers, not driven by headlines or generalized advice. Now let us take this one layer deeper, because the trap is not only financial, it is also emotional. There is comfort in doing something decisive, especially when it feels like you are securing your future. But thoughtful pacing often creates better outcomes than bold moves. And that can feel counterintuitive at first. So the question becomes very simple. How do you know how much to convert each year? And this is where a clear framework can help. Not perfect, but practical and grounded in reality. Something you can adjust as your life evolves. Let us walk through that framework next. A simple framework can make this decision feel much more manageable. Not perfect, but clear enough to guide consistent action. It begins with understanding your current tax bracket, and more importantly, how much room you have within it. This is often called filling the bracket. You convert just enough to reach the top of your target range, but not so much that you spill into a higher bracket. This keeps your tax rate controlled and predictable. Now, your target bracket is not always the lowest one available. Sometimes it makes sense to use a slightly higher bracket intentionally, especially if future income is expected to increase. But this decision should be grounded in actual projections, not general assumptions or broad advice. The next step is coordinating with your other income sources. This includes pensions, part-time work, and investment income. Each of these affects how much space you have available and how efficiently a conversion can be executed. Then comes something many people overlook: the impact on Medicare premiums. Crossing certain income thresholds can increase your costs significantly, and those increases can last for an entire year. So a slightly smaller conversion can sometimes create a better outcome, even if it means paying a bit more tax later. Now let us connect this back to behavior again. Consistency tends to outperform intensity in this context. Small, repeated adjustments often lead to smoother results, rather than large, infrequent decisions. This also gives you flexibility as your situation changes, because retirement rarely unfolds exactly as planned. Markets shift, expenses change, and priorities evolve. A flexible strategy can adapt to these realities. Now here is another subtle point. Taxes are only one part of the equation. Liquidity, peace of mind, and simplicity also matter. Some people prefer having more assets in Roth accounts because it reduces uncertainty later in life. That emotional benefit is real and worth acknowledging, but it should still be balanced against measurable costs, because clarity is not the same as efficiency. And sometimes the simpler path is not the most optimal one. So the goal is not perfection. It is alignment between your numbers and your comfort. Now, as we move toward the final piece of this, there is one more layer that deserves attention, because even a well-executed plan can drift over time if it is not revisited and adjusted periodically. And this is where long-term awareness becomes essential. Not constant worry, but gentle, ongoing attention. Let us bring everything together in the final section. When you step back, the Roth conversion decision becomes much clearer. It is not about chasing a perfect tax outcome. It is about avoiding unnecessary financial friction over time. The trap forms when decisions are made in isolation, without seeing how each piece connects to the larger picture. So let us bring the key ideas together gently. First, not everyone benefits equally from Roth conversions. Your current and future tax situation matters more than general advice. Second, timing is often more important than the total amount converted. The quiet years of lower income can offer unique opportunities. Third, the system surrounding taxes is interconnected. Changes in income affect more than just your tax bill. They influence healthcare costs and benefit taxation. Fourth, pacing tends to outperform urgency. Gradual adjustments create smoother and often better results. And finally, flexibility is one of your greatest advantages. You do not need to decide everything all at once. Now, here is something worth reflecting on. Many financial strategies are presented as definitive answers, but retirement rarely responds well to rigid thinking. It is a phase of life that evolves in quiet, unexpected ways. Your needs shift, your priorities soften, and your pace changes, and your financial decisions should reflect that reality. So instead of asking, should I convert everything now? A more helpful question might be this. What is the most balanced decision for this year? One that respects both the numbers and your peace of mind. Because the goal is not just efficiency. It is confidence in the path you are taking. And that confidence often comes from simplicity, from understanding what truly matters and what does not. Now, as we move into the final moments of this conversation, there is one last idea to hold on to. You are not trying to win a tax game. You are trying to build a life that feels steady and sustainable. And sometimes that means accepting a little imperfection in exchange for greater clarity and ease. Because not every decision needs to be maximized. Some simply need to be good enough and well understood. And that is often where real peace begins. And that is often where real peace begins to take shape. So instead of reacting quickly, you begin to move more deliberately. Each decision becomes part of a longer, more thoughtful timeline. Not rushed, not forced, but aligned with your actual life. And this is where the Roth Conversion Trap quietly loses its power. Because it depends on urgency, assumption, and incomplete information. When those are replaced with clarity, the outcome changes. Now you are no longer trying to outguess the system. You are simply working within it more intelligently. And that shift is both practical and deeply calming. So when you hear that Roth conversions are always the right move, you can gently pause and look a little deeper, because what sounds universally true is often highly personal. And your situation deserves that level of attention. The real risk was never missing out on a strategy. It was applying it without understanding its full impact. Now you have a clearer lens to evaluate that decision, not through urgency, but through quiet awareness. You can recognize the difference between helpful guidance and advice that may not fully apply to your life. You can see how timing shapes outcomes more than bold actions, and how smaller steps often create better long-term results. There is no need to rush through something this important, and no reward for solving everything in a single year. What matters is that your decisions remain connected to your reality, your income, your needs, and your sense of comfort. Because retirement is not a mathematical problem to solve. It is a phase of life to move through with awareness. And your financial strategy is simply there to support that, not to dominate it or create unnecessary pressure. So if you have been feeling uncertain about this decision, that's a signal that you are paying attention to the full picture. And that awareness is more valuable than any single tactic, because it allows you to adjust, refine, and move forward steadily without locking yourself into decisions that cannot be reversed. And that flexibility is one of your greatest advantages, especially in a stage of life where change is constant. So you do not need to get everything exactly right. You simply need to stay engaged and gently intentional. Because over time, those small decisions begin to add up, and they shape a retirement that feels more stable and more yours. And that is a very different experience. One that feels lighter, clearer, and more sustainable. So you can take a breath and ease into this process without needing to rush toward a perfect answer, because it was alignment, clarity, and quiet confidence. And those are built gradually, not instantly. So allow yourself to move at a pace that feels right, to adjust when needed, and to stay open to change. And that is not a weakness, but a quiet strength. A sign that you are thinking beyond rigid formulas and towards something more balanced and sustainable. And that effort deserves to support your life today as well. Because you planned for the future, and you are also allowed to live in the present.